Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. This might surprise you. Architecture can solve killings, and it has. Lately, it's also done wonders for Coney Island, a city park in the South Bronx, and some waterfront parks in Long Island City and Brooklyn. These nuggets and other gems were dug up by the inquisitive mind of Michael Kimmelman, the architecture critic of the New York Times. He is here to enlighten, maybe even dazzle us. Next. Michael Kimmelman, a delight to see you again. And there's so much to talk about. You have been all over you're piling up frequent flyer miles. I mean, Australia,
if only
Jakarta.
The airlines actually honored the frequent flyers programs.
Yes, if they did.
Yes.
He's been, I don't know, he's been everywhere. Jakarta, Australia, London, Chicago, and Coney Island.
Indeed.
I was out there not long ago to see the new shark exhibit in the new building. And I know you wrote about it. It struck me as just a fun building that belongs, 100 yards from an amusement park.
Yeah, I think that was the idea. It was an interesting thing about the aquarium. It was always part of Coney Island, but somehow was separate from it. So,
exactly.
The campus was this kind of dowager that had turned its back on the boardwalk. You never really knew the aquarium was there if you went down the boardwalk.
It was a wall.
It was a wall, and it sort of was turned up its nose a little bit at Luna Park. When Sandy happened and the aquarium was really socked, I mean, it was a heroic effort that the aquarium went through to save almost all the animals that were there, because the place was completely flooded. That sounds funny, but in fact, it was a disaster, and there was no electricity, and feeding them was a problem. Anyway, after that, they, have had to think about how to redo the campus. They had already been thinking about a new exhibit for the sharks, and part of the idea was maybe we can open up the aquarium to the boardwalk.
To the sea.
And to the sea, which is, as you say, there it is. It's part of what the subject of the aquarium is. And to make something that had a little reference to the surroundings, which included, a little of the honky-tonk of the architecture of Luna Park.
Describe it a little, architecturally.
What's interesting
about it. I love those fluttering
floating panels,
aluminum things.
That's basically the main statement. So, we're not talking about a great, fantastic work of architecture. We're talking about something very playful that's focused on what happens inside. But on the outside, what was not, because it's a kind of gray building, looks like a maroon ship on the shore. But the part that's really interesting is they got an artist to wrap much of the outside in this kind of ribbon of thousands of these little aluminum panels which flutter in the breeze. So the building is...
Scales of a fish.
Exactly. And also, it feels like it's their response to all the flashing neon and stuff. It's a building that seems alive and can be seen from other parts of the boardwalk and around and as something moving.
Talk a little bit about the fact that this is a cultural facility in a very underserved, a very poor community.
Right. I mean, you have to remember that the aquarium is used primarily by people from Brooklyn, and it is also very much a part of this community, Coney Island, which has always been underserved, full of housing projects. That's across the street from Fred Trump's projects too. And so, making that facility more accessible, more enjoyable, something to be proud of, is an act in that community too. It is not just something that everybody in the city, and even tourists, of course, come to look at. It's something that kids in the neighborhood use a lot. It's an educational program.
I think, as you pointed out in the article, the vast majority of visitors to the aquarium and to Coney Island come from Brooklyn.
Absolutely, and many of the ones in the aquarium come from that neighborhood. So as I say, it's also an educational facility. I mean, I think it's one of those cases where architecture can serve to enhance community pride. Buildings are not just objects that you do stuff in. They're part of our identity in a community or a neighborhood. And I think if something is invested in them, people will take pride in them and care for them more and value them more and see that an investment has been made in their area too. So I'm a big believer in putting serious architectural ambition into underserved neighborhoods, not just in the places that rich people live in where tourists go.
Talk about, apparently we have almost brand new minted waterfront parks in where, Long Island City?
Yep.
And
a couple in Brooklyn, yeah. So yeah, 3 new parks have opened just this summer alone along the Brooklyn-Queens waterfront. One of them is Pier 3 at Brooklyn Bridge Park. It's the last of the piers to open at that park. We're 85-acre park, and this is a 5-acre, 4.5-acre chunk, which is very beautiful. It's about passive use. In other words, it's got a lawn. It's not sheep meadow, but it's the closest you'll get to it on Brooklyn Bridge Park, and a beautiful plaza that overlooks the water. And then in Williamsburg, just a little farther north, the Domino project,
the old
which
sugar
on the site of the old sugar refinery, as part of this massive 5 million square foot development that's promised by Two Trees, the developer, Brooklyn developer. A park about a quarter mile long, also about 5 acres, has opened on the waterfront there. Quite fancy, and I have to say, to the credit of Jed Walentis, who runs Two Trees, the city required that something be put there that was public in terms of open space, but he far exceeded the city requirements and really built something very busy, complex, maybe a little too overstuffed, but full of cool stuff, including a Danny DeMeyer taco stand and
my God.
Very fancy playground and a dog run and a volleyball court.
Yeah.
And he recycled, well, I should say he, but also working with an architect named Lisa Switkin, who comes from the same firm that did the High Line, James Corner's firm. Designed this, it's a quite sophisticated park, yeah. And then the third park is at Hunters Point South, which is the peninsula at the tip of Long Island City.
Exactly.
And again, all 3 of these are attached to development projects that began in the Bloomberg administration. So this one...
And these parks, public amenities.
That's right. That's right. So in Hunters Point, the first half of the park, an 11-acre park, opened in 2013. And the second half is now finished. And it, like a little bit like Brooklyn Bridge Park, it's a more passive park. So it's about views and quiet places, and it's actually really beautiful. And yeah, it's a wonderful thing that the city...
Are they? Can you assess whether they're accessible easily or conveniently by people who are not in the neighborhood?
Yeah. So I was going to say this is a really nice thing. Is not only are these sort of sops to big real estate developments, but each of them really are public facing. So Hunters Point South is actually right at the ferry. There at the point of where the ferry crosses from 34th Street and makes a loop around the East River. Brooklyn Bridge Park is, of course, mobbed with people.
Yes.
And it's as accessible as the rest of the park, which is accessible to millions. This is a little bit of a relief because it's so jammed to add 4.5 acres of breathing room. And then Domino did a very interesting thing, which was they actually added a street that hadn't existed before that separates the park from where the development will be, which is a very generous move that both makes the park more accessible, but also announces that it isn't simply the backyard for a bunch of giant skyscrapers, luxury towers, but is really its own thing. So I think in all those cases, there's been an effort made to really make the parks public. Now, when all those developments are built out, let's talk about it again.
Right, okay. Hearing you talk about the High Line and also mentioning in reference to those developments where the parks, multi-million, maybe billion, makes me think of the thing on the west side, Hudson Yards. I know you've written about it. I was noticing that the first phase is supposed to open next March.
Yeah.
And a couple of business publications have said that Hudson Yards has already achieved its economic goals. I don't know. But I was wondering, did it have any architectural goals, and has it achieved or not?
So, I mean, Hudson Yards...
or is it too soon? I mean, it's not all...
Well, certainly too soon to know what Hudson Yards will be, because there's only the beginnings of the development there, really. I mean, you have the coach building, and you have what's called the shed.
Right,
which
is, you liked a lot.
Well, I like, it's interesting. I've come around to the shed. At first, I didn't really get it, but I think it could be actually quite interesting. At first, I thought it was just a building with no particular purpose. I think, well, the jury's out. In fairness, they may come up with a program for the shed, and it has this sort of gimmick, but it's rather cool, this moving awning, basically, but giant, which will create a potentially beautiful new public space in front of the building.
And essentially, it's going to be a performing arts space?
Yeah. Well, performing and visual arts space, and I think it'll be programmed a little like an arts festival, but with longer-term exhibits and performances, run by a man who came from England to do this. We'll see when it opens. The Hudson Yards has real architectural ambitions, and the architect of the shed is also doing a big residential tower there, a firm called Diller Sgraffito. The question really has always been with Hudson Yards, what kind of a place is it going to be? So you can build all of these massive, fancy developments, but is it going to be a place that's actually very appealing? What kind of open space will it actually have? How will it knit into the surrounding neighborhoods? I mean, I think if you probably ask people in the Bloomberg administration now, some of them would say they regret not having held related, the developers, feet to the fire a bit more in terms of ensuring open space, cultural and other sort of public spirited.
Like with these developments we were talking connected to the waterfront park.
Right. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of architectural ambition there, but how much good city building will end up, I don't really know.
Well, I tried to get a look at it, from various streets. It's a little hard with all that construction. But that thing in the middle, called the vessel, to me, it looks like a stack of weights in a gym that, where the guy pulled and now they're up. I mean, it just, I don't, what is that?
So you're talking about basically a sculpture?
A sculpture,
That's also supposed to be something people can climb inside of. That's designed by a designer named Thomas Heatherwick.
A lot of staircases.
Yeah. So the head of Related, Steve Ross, really wanted to have something that wasn't just a piece of plop art plopped in the middle of the plaza where these things are. He wanted something else.
Could have had a Giacometti or two.
He could have, he could have.
But he's got this thing.
He decided to do something. He spent a lot of money. And I have to say that I think I'm with you.
In case you would like to forget this, I'm not going to let you forget it because it's in print.
No.
You called it a clunky and pointless
I mean, it's the
structure.
Look, there's a lot of things that money could be spent on. He can spend his money any way he wants. I happen to be a little skeptical about the idea that people are dying in New York City to climb 15 flights of stairs to be at the top of something that doesn't actually look out over anything but is still overshadowed by these giant buildings. So everybody's going to try to climb it once, and then, I don't know.
Then they'll say, what are we doing?
And it doesn't really fit with the shed and other things around there. So
but I think your point...
Maybe it's not the best.
Yeah, but overall your point, the central point is, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a place of a community?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be...
just
a
another
lot
bunch
of
of
steel and glass.
Yeah, look.
And we don't know yet.
Right. I think we've not been very good as a city at planning neighborhoods and new developments. Now, that may sound like an odd thing to say, but look at the World Trade Center. We built the big Twin Towers. That didn't really create much of a neighborhood.
No.
A neighborhood has grown up around that site in recent years.
Almost in spite
of what's happened there. And what have we put there again? Well, we put sort of a giant office park.
Right.
Some of those buildings are very nice, and there are things about that office park which are an improvement over the way the Twin Towers worked in the lower Manhattan. But on the whole, that was not what the city needed, and it's not a particularly neighborhoody place. So not every neighborhood has to feel like Greenwich Village, but I think when we take on these big developments, it's an important thing to go through this process. What makes a neighborhood? What makes a place where people want to work as well as live. A lot of things go into that. It's like we need housing in the city. We need affordable housing in the city. But a bunch of apartment buildings is not going to create a place people want to live.
On the subject of affordable housing, you were talking earlier about an interesting initiative going on, particularly in Chicago, between affordable housing and libraries, branch libraries.
Yeah.
I want to know.
Look, I think the library, the branch library, is almost the most interesting, what you might call topology of all architectural types these days, all kind of building types. I say that because, the library we grew up with, which was a sleepy place with books where you had to be quiet, has really turned into the hub of so many different kinds of communities. Almost every community, on some level now, every urban community, not just in New York, revolves around the branch library because it's a place for toddlers, for kids after school, for those looking for a job, and for the homeless, for the elderly. It's got a million different, in Chicago, you go to libraries there, they have recording studios. You go into Chinatown there, they have Chinese opera. There's a million things that go on there. So we were talking about how you build neighborhoods. You don't just build houses. In Chicago, one of the ideas has been, look, if we're going to build public housing, which they're still doing, then maybe we should put things in the public housing, which will also be attractions for the community. And not just the community in the housing, but everyone who lives around it. So what about libraries? So in at least 3 cases, they're building these new projects with housing, senior housing and other housing, with libraries embedded in them. And New York has had similar programs to try to create neighborhoods and promote neighborhoods around libraries. In Sunset Park, for instance, there's a new affordable housing project which will include a library. I actually think it's a wonderful change to the status of the library. And it's also a wonderful pillar, the library, for community development.
I was fascinated by a piece you wrote about something called forensic architecture, which I'd not heard of. And it actually solves crimes.
Yes, that's true.
Including in your article, a case of a Bedouin villager cut down by, I guess, Israeli
That's right.
troops.
Yeah. So
how does this work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And what does it have to do with architecture? So an Israeli architect named Eyal Weizman, about 15 years ago, started to investigate developments in the West Bank, Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and got in some trouble when he tried to organize an exhibition, Israeli-sponsored, about those settlements. And it made him think a little bit about the ways in which architecture has a sort of social political role. And he began to think about ways in which he could investigate the places, essentially to see architecture as not just a building, but a situation, a place. So he began to combine sort of the tools of, Hercule Poirot with tools that architects were using to model buildings. And he began to reconstruct crime scenes or potential crime scenes. So, for instance, in the case you're describing, there was a Bedouin village that the Israeli army was going to get rid of in order to build some new development. When they moved in, there were some protesters, and one of the Bedouin, it was a farmer, was accused of having driven his car into an Israeli soldier and killing him. And that Bedouin villager was shot. By
the troops, by the Israelis.
So Weizman created this organization called Forensic Architecture to do forensics, to analyze, as he put it, forensics are always something that are used by the police, by the prosecutor, to investigate crimes and to charge people. Maybe if we can do forensics on the people who are in power, we can test whether what they're saying is true. So he was hired by the Bedouin villagers, and not for money, but just enlisted.
Sure.
And began to investigate all of this. They crowdsourced all of the cameras,
Camera photos, videos.
helicopter footage, everything they could get, in order to piece together what had actually happened, and discovered that, in fact, the Israeli soldiers had shot the man who was not speeding into a police officer, but was just driving slowly with his lights on. Once he was shot in the leg, he sped ahead and hit this man, and then, unintentionally, it seemed, he was shot, and then he was killed by Israeli soldiers, and that is also shown on the helicopter footage. This was one of those scandals in Israel which the authorities had, denied was true, and they said this was, just absolutely fake news. And then here was the forensic evidence, which showed that, in fact, that was
he
true.
was able to present that to authorities, and they, accepted it?
So it was then presented to the media in Israel, which printed and published this, forcing the authorities to respond, and eventually to acknowledge that what they said had been a murder by the farmer was, in fact, an accident by the police, who were actually shown just shooting the man in the car, if you then look at the videos that he accumulated. So they changed their tune. They have not prosecuted, I don't think, anyone for this crime and for the murder of the farmer, but they have acknowledged that, in fact, their original account was not true.
You wrote that this is spread to places in Western Europe and some in Latin America.
Yeah, all
coming
over.
here.
Yeah, I mean, the Times has actually done some work as well with forensic architecture. It's what makes it architecture again. I mean, I think what's interesting about it is this idea that so the site of architecture in this case is the site in which this incident happened. And for this group, I think they are trying to produce something that produces information, and that is a kind of substitute for the building. It sounds a little abstract, but it's actually quite practical and has been very effective in rooting out not just injustices by authorities, but also in piecing together information which has been lost, like what happened to missing children in Mexico. Well, you get the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wonder, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, had this existed back in the 60s in this country, I wonder what it would have found out about Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, what they're
absolutely.
I mean, what they're exploiting is exactly what we have tried to eke every drop of information out of, which is that one Zapruder film. In this case, now you have this proliferation of information and video information and so forth out there, which you can literally piece together. They've done it with the Grenfell fire, for instance, in London.
Right.
There's hundreds and thousands of bits of information that they can...
70 or 80 people died, and
exactly.
The building just went up like a torch.
That's right. And they've been able to piece together exactly how that happened by crowdsourcing all of these bits of information out there and creating essentially a 3D real-time reconstruction of that fire. So yeah, in Dallas it's true. The things that have made this possible are the changes in technology, both with the proliferation of information, but also changes in the way architects and others can model things. So they can use a computer essentially to create or to reconstruct the spaces of, say, the building of the Grenfell fire or that place in the Bedouin village. That, of course, we didn't have anything like that even 15 years ago.
We have less than a minute, and I said at the top, Michael's been all over the place. One of the places you were, Jakarta, I guess for the Times series about sinking cities
yeah.
And Jakarta is sinking.
Yeah.
Mexico City is sinking. Houston, have they learned anything since Hurricane Harvey?
You know,
where they built so much in the floodplains.
Yeah.
And they don't want any government there to tell them what to do,
Yeah.
or not to do that.
Yeah. Look, one of the lessons I think that I learned in looking into cities around the world and dealing with climate change and issues like this is that progress is very slow. And even in the Netherlands, which is looked at as the model for how to deal with water, rising seas, and it's taken generations, really centuries, to develop a system of accepting the problem and anticipating the problem and really building for it. So the saddest part, I think, is that in a place like Houston, you have a lot of people who were galvanized right after the last flood, the third in 3 years. But that kind of energy dissipates, and in this political climate, it's very hard to maintain that energy.
Michael Kimmelman, it is so delightful to talk to you, and so
Pleasure.
enlightening, and I feel like I've been on a tour around the world, and I thank you. And you didn't charge much.
No, just a low fee.
Thanks again.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. We will see you next time.